Hi, I'm Cheryl from Evoca. In this video we will continue to make the SSS shader. So where we left off was we had created the diffuse part. Now before we go any further, like I like to do, is save. So this button here will apply the changes. So if you tick this, it will make the changes. Once that's grayed out, you know that it's been done. And then what we want to do is save that before we go any further, just in case something was to happen. So I'll just move this to the side. And again, because it's got the little asterisks, we right click and save. Okay, that's been done. Okay, so we'll now continue with the rest of the shader. So what we want to do now is add on some simple stuff, and then we'll get to the subsurface scattering part after this. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the specular, because it's actually quite simple to do. So what we'll do is we'll move this to the side. Now, if you remember, we kept the spec map that we had already in here. I'm just going to delete the texture coordinate because we don't need that in this case. And I'm just going to drag this over. So I click, hold, and drag this over. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to control the brightness of the specular. So what we're going to do is, like we did in here with changing the diffuse color, we're going to put in a constant to allow us to change the brightness. Now we don't need a constant vector 3, we don't need to change the color. If you do want to change the color of the spec, that's fine, but in this case we're just going to leave it as is. So again, you can come into here and the material expressions and type in constant, or from here, from the grey area, press 1 on the keyboard and click, that'll bring in a constant. And we will create this into a parameter. So to do that, right click, convert to parameter, and remember to give it a name. So we'll call it spec brightness. We will put it into the group called spec and give it a description. So spec brightness, like so. We'll just give this a default value of say 0.5 to start with, at least then it won't be black. Okay, and just like what we did with the diffuse color, we want to multiply these together. So again, in material expressions, start typing in multiply, click and drag, or M on the keyboard and click. And we just want to multiply these together. So the RGB of the spec to the spec brightness. RGB of spec goes to A, spec brightness goes into B. And this just plugs into specular. Now you'll probably notice there was a slight change happen in the actual preview here. Now it will actually be more apparent once we plug in the normal maps, but you can see there's a bit of a spec highlight here. If I make the brightness a little bit brighter, just say I make it 1, you'll notice it's brighter again, 2, and it's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. So that is what we want for the spec. Now what that's also doing is that is taking into account what you have created in Photoshop to make it brighter or duller. So depending on the type of material, depends on how bright or dull the material actually will be. And it goes off what you've painted. The darker the painting is, it won't be as bright. The lighter it is to white, it will be brighter. So if you had a metal material, for example, part of her belt, it would have been, the spec mat would have been painted as white as possible to make it nice and shiny like a metal. Okay, now what we also want to do is we want to bring in a spec power. Now this works in conjunction with specular. Spec power controls the tightness of the specular fall off. For example, skin only has a low spec power unless you've been to the gym and you've got beads of sweat down you. Of course, that's going to be slightly higher spec power. So the specular power on your skin will be higher when you've been at the gym compared to just normal underneath an office lights or the sun. This also helps when you're doing foliage. Depending on the leaf, you might have waxy leaves. The spec power on that is going to be tighter compared to non-waxy leaves where the spec is going to be a bit more diffuse. So for a spec power, all you need is a constant. So I'm going to move these out of the way and bring in a spec power constant. Again, start typing in constant in material expressions or 1 and click. And again, we want to turn this into a parameter so we can tweak it later on. So again, right click, convert to parameter, and we'll call this spec power. Okay, and the group, we want to create one called spec, and description, spec power. And all we do is plug that into specular power. Now you'll notice that that went really diffuse in a really big colour. It's because at the moment it's on black. So if I make this say 20, you'll notice that highlight gets tighter and tighter. 200, as you can see, is very, very tight. I'm just going to leave it on 10 for now. And there's your spec power and your spec brightness all done. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to show you how you can also comment these chunks, because it is starting to get a little bit messier. And we can comment these into little chunks. So, I'll just move the spec power out of the way for the moment. And let's have a look at these 3 nodes. Now, these 3 nodes are connected to the specular. So, if you highlight them all, and just move them out of the way for a little bit, while they're still highlighted anywhere close to it on the grey area, if you right click, and let me just see if I can get this on the viewing screen. Okay, if you right click anywhere here, you'll see down the bottom you've got a new comment. This will bring up a comment box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in spec app. And what it's done is right here, and it's taking my spec brightness, right here you have got a spec map comment box. Now, if you're wondering how I'm dragging it, I'm just highlighting spec maps, holding down the control key and dragging, clicking and dragging. So what I want to do is I want to encompass these 3 nodes. To encompass that, if it hasn't actually done it like it's supposed to for me, grab this little black arrow here and drag her out so it's the size of your thing. And also, if you notice, now that it's encompassing that, I can grab the word spec map and it's actually moving the whole clump, which is what you want. So this is also another way of commenting your nodes and then putting them into chunks of certain comments. So we'll do the same with the skin, the skin diffuse. If I highlight all of that, right click, a new comment, and I'll put skin diffuse. Now they do allow spaces in this section, and it's not quite grabbed them all, but if I drag that out, and there's my skin diffuse. So I can now grab skin diffuse, hold down the control key and drag, and it's grabbed all of my skin diffuse. And I'm not too worried about doing it for spec power, it's only one little node. So that is how you can comment chunks of your code so you can easily go to it when you need to quickly look at something. Okay. What we'll do is we'll save. So tick the apply changes and we'll save your assets. So again, go to content browser, right click and save. Okay, now the next thing we'll do is we'll bring in the normal maps. So to bring in the normal map, I'll just move this aside. If you remember, we've already got the texture sample. So I'll delete the texture coordinate. And if you don't have the texture sample, again, if you come into your textures and you can drag in your Selena body normal map into the material editor. So let's move this up a little bit. Now, sometimes normal maps, they may look a little bit weak in an engine. So what we need to do is we need to create a function to increase it so it looks more normal mapped. So to do this, we're going to create a couple of nodes. Very, very simple. And this will push the normal map further. So all we need for this is a constant 3 vector. So type in constant 3 or 3 and click. And we want to put a certain value in here. We do not want to turn this into an instance or a parameter, this part of the shader, because if you push it too far, the normal map looks a bit too strange and it's too punched. So there's a figure that is quite nice. You can tweak a little bit to your liking, but be very careful with the figures because it's very sensitive. So what we're doing is, when it comes to pushing out normal maps, now a normal map, the RGB is exactly the same as XYZ. Now it's usually the Z that's going to be punched out more. So what we're going to do is type in the R, we're going to type in 1. In the G, we're going to type in 1. And in the B, 0.5. And if you do change the B, it can push it out more or it can make it too soft. So these seem to be really nice figures. Again, play to your liking. All we need to do with this is multiply it. So M and click, or in the material expressions, type in multiply. We want to plug in the RGB of the texture sample to A and the constant into B. And you can see from here that this has been pushed just a little bit further. And all we do here is plug this into normal. And as you can see in this example here, this little preview, the normal map's come back and it's made it a lot better. So, like what we did for the spec map and the skin diffuse, let's comment this box. So, if we drag around these 3 nodes, just move them out a little bit. Come into here. Right click and new comment. And we'll type in normal maps. And this one actually did it nice and neatly. We also want to name this texture sample. So click on the texture sample, come into description, and we'll type in normal map texture. Okay. So now what we've done is we have now got a diffuse with the epidermis plugged in. We have got the specular map. We've got the spec power that allows you to change the tightness or how much diffuse the spec is. And we have got the normal map. So in the next video, we will plug in the rest of the SSS shader, and then we will turn it into an instance and tweak it out.